Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Keith Holloway, Media Relations Officer for the investigation into the fatal May 13th, 2019 mid-air collision in Ketchikan, Alaska. We will begin the availability in about 2 minutes. Again, I'm Keith Holloway, Media Relations Officer for the NTSB, and in this investigation into the fatal May 13, 2019 mid-air collision in Ketchikan, Alaska. We are here to answer questions about the information discussed today during the board meeting. Conducting the availability will be NTSB Chairman Robert Sumwalt, spelled R-O-B-E-R-T, Sumwalt, S-U-M-W-A-L-T. Following his brief remarks, he will take questions. The investigator in charge for this accident is also participating in this briefing. He is Aaron Sauer, spelled A-A-R-O-N-S-A-U-E-R. A few ground rules before we get started. To ask questions via the Q&A feature, not the chat. To ask a question, select the question icon on the upper right hand of your screen. The icon is depicted with a question mark in a box. Type your question along with your name and media affiliation and submit it. I will read the questions. This session is being recorded and will be made publicly available. The entire briefing, including the Q&A, will be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel, ntsb.gov, later today or tomorrow. At this point, I will turn it over to Chairman Sumwalt.
Keith, thank you very much. I want to acknowledge the good work of the NTSB's investigative staff. We've got Aaron Sauer, who was the investigator in charge for this accident. He had a great team to work with. I think that there were surprises along the way. It was not just a regular tragic mid-air collision. It was a tragic mid-air collision where we were able to learn a lot of things about limitations to systems that we did not necessarily know beforehand. So Aaron, thank you and your team. The entire purpose of the NTSB's investigation is to truly learn from it so that we can make recommendations to keep these things from happening again. We issued 10 safety recommendations and reiterated one. And again, I think that these safety recommendations, if implemented, will go a long ways towards improving transportation safety. This accident, I believe, just revolves around 4 main topics. Of course, you heard the probable cause statement. That's really the message to take away. But if I had to summarize it, I'd say there's 4 things. First, the limitations of the see and avoid system. We have known about the limitations of this for a long time. Quite frankly, when you're out there flying around in the big sky, it can be difficult to spot another airplane. I pointed out the Grand Canyon crash that happened in June of 1956, 65 years ago. And that was an accident where we pointed out the limitations of see and avoid, and that has gone on for a long time. Those limitations, it's a perennial problem. As Vice Chairman Landsberg said, once the second aircraft was invented and built, we started having the mid-air potential. And so I hope that today's recommendations will help to drive down the number of mid-airs. Another issue that this accident revolves around is the ADSB upgrade that was implemented in 2015. It was supposed to be an upgrade, and in many respects, perhaps it is, but it took out a safety protection, namely no visual and oral alerting once that new system was put in place. That's a big gap in the safety net. We found that the Otter was not transmitting pressure altitude, which made it essentially electronically visible to the Beaver's pilot. And finally, a lack of SMS. And we know that one of the components of SMS is risk management. Part of that risk management is change management. When you start changing things, so SMS would require you to carefully analyze that change, try and understand the hazards associated with the change, assess the level of risk, and if those risks are higher than you're willing to accept, then you need to mitigate those risks. And clearly that was not done. And so, as I said, and something that I read in the board meeting, because Taquan Air did not perform a safety risk assessment when adding new avionics in 2015. The company did not understand the operation of the Garmin GSL 71, and as a result, did not develop adequate training, checklist, and procedures to ensure proper operation of the system. So I'd be glad to turn it over for questions. And Keith, what do we have?
All right, we have a few questions. To begin, Jill Burke with Alaska News Source. The question is, would you explain conversationally why the collision alert avionics did not alert the pilots to each other's position to each other? Understand there are a few factors.
Yes, I'll try and do it in language that I can understand. And that's the way I have to think. There's a lot of technical issues here, but basically when the Otter's system was upgraded around in 2015, before the upgrade, it had a system that could generate visual and oral alerts, which would then be sent to the primary flight display, or the EFIS, I should say, and give you an alert. So that was before the upgrade. The system would provide oral and visual alerts. Now, after the upgrade, there was no capability, there was no algorithm to generate oral alert messages. So that was one problem. Another problem is, and Aaron, did I get that right? Before the upgrade, yes, it could generate visual and oral alerts. Yes, before the upgrade. That's right. Is that correct?
You are correct, sir.
Okay, thank you. After the upgrade, the algorithms would not generate alerts. So that's one issue. So that's why the Otter pilot did not get any alerts associated with the Beaver. As far as the Beaver pilot is concerned, he could not receive the alerts, could not get alerts, because his system only looked at pressure altitude. Because the Otter pilot had turned, because Taquan had somebody along the way turned off the altitude, the pressure altitude transmitting capability of that airplane. There was a switch on the GSL 71 that was turned off. That removed the ability of the Otter to transmit pressure altitude. The Beaver it was only capable of looking at pressure altitude. And as I described it to someone earlier this morning, it would be like people speaking two different languages. Somebody is speaking in one language, but the receiver doesn't understand that language. And so we had a multitude of problems. The problems with the upgrade of 2015, which prevented the Otter from receiving alerts, and the fact that the GSL 71 on the Otter was turned off prevented the Beaver pilot from being able to receive alerts. It's complex, and I hope that helps to lay it out. Aaron, did I miss any significant points on that?
You did well, Chairman. The only thing I would add is the ADSB upgrade components that were installed in 2015 did meet the FAA standard that that was current at the time. The FAA standard that was current at the time did not include those algorithms that Chairman Sumwalt referenced in regards to the alerting functionality of the unit. So that's all I would have to answer.
Great, thank you very much. Great points. Okay, Keith, what's next? Jill, thank you for your question. Excuse me.
Jill has a follow-up question, and that is, what role do you feel the FAA has in ensuring better safety moving forward, and what role does Congress have, if any?
Well, let's begin with what the FAA didn't do, and we clearly noted in the probable cause, which was adopted unanimously by the board, was that contributing to the accident, number one, was the Federal Aviation's provisions of new transceivers that lacked altitude alerting capability to the Capstone program without adequately mitigating the increased risk associated with consequent loss of previously available information, alerting capability. We don't know why that was missed in the risk assessment, but we do know that that alerting, oral and visual alerting, is key to collision avoidance. We don't want pilots spending their entire time flying looking down at a display. They need to be out looking for other things, monitoring the flight instruments, monitoring the flight path, looking for terrain, looking for other traffic. So it's important to have an oral and visual alert to call your attention to potential intruder traffic. So that's what we feel that the FAA did not do. Now, what we want them to do moving forward is, as you know, we issued 2 safety recommendations, and that is to basically establish special federal regulations or other means to require air tour operators, whether they're under Part 91 or Part 135, to require that they be equipped with ADSB out and in supported traffic advisory systems, and the ability to have that oral and visual alerting. And it should also be designed to minimize nuisance alerts, and that it remains on during all flight operations. So that's a major thing that the FAA can and should do, and it should be done sooner rather than later. That's one thing right there, Jill.
All right, we have another question from Zaz, and I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Zaz Hollander of Anchorage Daily News. And the question is, what assurance do you have the FAA will enact recommendations? First question.
What assurance?
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah, what assurance do we have that the FAA is going to act? We don't have assurance, but we push, and the NTSB has very much of an interest and concern with air safety in the state of Alaska. As you know, we were there almost a year and a half ago, September of 19, to have a roundtable. We're very interested in that. We've called on the FAA to put a special focus on safety issues in Alaska, because certainly there are, as you well know, there are unique issues to aviation safety in the wonderful state of Alaska. We will push, and we will push. And if invited to come in and testify to Congress on this topic, we will gladly do so, because we have a very tragic situation here. 6 lives were lost, 10 survivors. Fortunately, they survived, but they had to go through and survive a mid-air collision and end up in the water. And so we don't want this to happen again. As you well know, it was July that we had another mid-air collision in Alaska, just south of Anchorage. And so we're very concerned about this, not only in Alaska, but throughout the United States. And I think Thad had a follow-up as well.
Yes, the follow-up question is, what's the success rate of the past 5 years in terms of FAA follow through on NTSB recommendation?
Well, 5 years, it's a very good question. 5 years, it's probably not too great because it does take them a while to implement our recommendations. But if you look at the history, going back to 1967 when the NTSB was formed, overall, and we can get you the exact numbers. Overall, our recommendation success rate is somewhere around 82%. I think, and I shouldn't say this if I don't know, I believe the FAA is slightly below that. I can understand why in the recent, in a 5-year period, not many recommendations have been implemented because, again, it takes, if we ask for rules, they have to go through the rulemaking process, and that process is painfully slow. But over time, the majority of our recommendations are implemented successfully. But we can get you the exact numbers for the FAA.
Bill Carey from Aviation Week asks, the FAA already requires ADS-B out in most controlled airspace. Would the NTSB recommendation to require ADS-B out in high traffic air tour areas extend the requirement to uncontrolled airspace outside of ADS-B out rule airspace?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't really, I mean, I heard what you said and I didn't hear it as a question. So Keith, could you repeat that?
Sure. The question is, would the NTSB recommendation to require ADS-B out in high traffic air tour areas extend the requirement to uncontrolled airspace outside of ADS-B out rule airspace?
So the question is, would we extend that to what is not currently required? Is that correct? Are we extending that to include high traffic air tour areas? Is that really what the question is?
Yes.
And we are. That is what I think 2 of our recommendations are calling for that. Recommendation 1 and the added recommendation 2 that we added that I don't have right in front of me because my printer doesn't work while I'm connected to the internet. Figure that out. But anyway, Aaron, what am I missing on that? We are requiring for ADS-B in and out for high traffic air tour areas. We are requiring that. So that's even outside of the current requirement, which I think ADS-B would be required above 10,000 feet. ADS-B out is required above 10,000 feet and in certain airspace. Is that correct? So now we're narrowing that down, and even if you're below 10 and not in that special in class B or C or maybe D airspace, we would still want it in these air tour areas. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. So for ADS-B out requirement for the 2020 mandate, there are it's class A, class B, class C, and then there's some class E with some exceptions to class E, as you kind of indicated with the 10,000 feet, and there's other exceptions in there as well. The first recommendation to the FAA, we're asking them to first off identify these high tour traffic areas, and then once those are identified, have the requirement for Part 135 and 91 passenger revenue air tour operations to be equipped with with ADS-B out and in technology to include alerting capability and so forth. The second part of that recommendation that was amended today includes, once those areas are defined and designated within the National Airspace System, that anybody operating Part 91, and there we'll have to see what the FAA comes back as all aircraft, or maybe there may be some exceptions to balloons and gliders. We'll see, but that they would be required, if they entered that defined area, to be equipped with ADS-B out at a minimum.
Thank you very much, Bill. Thank you for your question.
All right. Becky Boer, she didn't state where she's from, but her question is, can you explain the safety risk assessment issue?
Yes, we can certainly address that. So, I mean, I'm not sure what level you want, and I want to make sure that I'm not over explaining it, mansplaining it. Can you type in there what specifically you'd like to know, and I can do my best to explain whatever it is you need.
Yeah, she states she's not well versed in aviation terminology.
Okay, all right. Well, there you go. There you go. So, and she wanted to know about safety risk management or safety management systems. Which did she want to know, or both?
Safety risk assessment issue.
Yeah. So basically, you've got this thing called safety management systems, which has been a buzzword that's been going around for about the last 15 years, and in aviation, and it's being applied to other areas as well. Safety risk management or safety management systems is basically a business approach to managing safety. If you've got a company, you're in the business to make money, so you're going to have a chief financial officer, you're going to have audits, you're going to internal audits, external audits, you'll have controls, you'll look for areas that you might be at risk, and that's what a company would do. So we want people to take a similar approach to managing safety, take a business approach to managing it. One of the components of safety management systems is safety risk management. So by that, it's pretty simple. We're going to look for those things that can hurt us, and if they can hurt us, we want to mitigate it. A definition of safety risk management is we manage risk whenever we modify the way that we do something to increase the chances of success or decrease the chances of injury, failure, or loss. So part of SMS would require, whenever you're changing anything, a new procedure, introducing new equipment, going into a new airport. Whenever you change something, you want to sit down and say, what is it about this operation that could hurt us? Maybe the runway is very short. Do we want to be going into this airport where the runway is very short? Well, it can be done safely if the wind is blowing straight down the runway, or if we're going to go into that airport, we only want the captain to fly the airplane instead of the new first officer. So you look for ways to mitigate those risks. And I hope I didn't mansplain that to you and over-explain it to you, but people's eyes tend to glaze over when you talk about risk management, but it's really not that difficult at all. Start looking for the things that could hurt you, and then figure out if you need to mitigate those risks. Thank you, Becky, for the question.
Becky has a follow-up question. She's with the Associated Press. What could Taekwon have done to find this risk assessment, and would it have known it needed to do an assessment with the upgrade?
That's a good question, and we do not believe that they did much of a risk assessment. Now, granted, our investigators had to dig and dig and dig to understand the nuances and the limitations of these avionics systems. Would they have been able to identify this? I think if they really dug, they would have understood that the newer system that they put in place did not have the capability to provide alerting systems. I think that was the main thing right there. They would have also have understood, if they did a proper risk assessment and really did their homework, they would have understood that if they turned that control head off that was called a GSL 71, that would prevent their system from transmitting pressure altitude. So I think that, and we believe that had that been done, had they really done an honest to goodness risk assessment and really looked, really did their homework and dug in, we feel that they could have known of those risks and therefore put in place mitigation strategies. Maybe it would be a checklist item to make sure that GSL 71 is turned on each flight. It had been off for 2 weeks. Why? So that's one of the things that a good, thorough risk management process would do for you.
Chairman, it looks like we have some follow-ups from a few of the same folks. So what I'm going to do is try to answer ask a couple of these questions that are left, and then we will have to conclude.
Thank you.
All right. This question is from Jill Burke from Alaska News. During the board meeting, there was a discussion about what responsibility Taekwon and his pilot may have or not had in the events that contributed to it. Can you clarify the board's position on this?
In other words, Jill's question is what could Taekwon have done to have better understood these risks? Or I'm not sure. I want to make sure I really answer her question.
Sure. Let me give it to you again.
Yeah.
The discussion during the board meeting was about the responsibility of Taekwon and its pilot, and what the pilot may have had or not had in the events that contributed to the crash. And can you clarify what the board's position on this, on the responsibility of the pilot?
Yeah, and thank you, Jill. I think that it's important to point out what the probable cause as adopted by the board was. The board did not include Taekwon Air or the pilot's actions or inactions. And that was something that I was asking Aaron and his team about yesterday. I felt like had Taekwon done a complete risk assessment, they would have identified this issue and or may have identified it. And the answer to that is yes. Also, could the pilot have ensured that his system was, his GSL 71 was turned on? And the answer is yes. But this whole thing about whether or not Taekwon Air or the pilot should have been included in the probable cause was a point that Aaron Sauer made to me yesterday. And that is, we don't know for a fact, because we could not receive data from the Beaver pilot's iPad. We don't know how his iPad was set up. He was displaying, well, normally he would display his flight information on his iPad using the ForeFlight app. We can't say for certain. And by the way, the app, if it was receiving pressure altitude information from the Otter, it would have given a aural and visual alert. That said, we don't know, was the Beaver pilot's app ForeFlight, was it even running? It probably was, but before we're going to put somebody in a probable cause statement, we need to have more information than that. How is it configured? We don't know. If we knew what the Beaver pilot was configured to display and hear, it might have been a different outcome on the probable cause. Aaron, would you like to add anything to that?
I guess the only thing I would add, Chairman Sumwalt, would be staff. The investigative staff believes that see and avoid, the concept of see and avoid is kind of plateaued. From the standpoint of there's technology out there that exists, and through this ADSB in and out systems, those systems can be integrated with technology that can provide alerts. There's a framework that is there and the technology exists, and the NTSB and our board members here made recommendations to get that technology out there into the industry and hopefully move the safety needle on the prevention of these mid-air collisions. That's about all I would add to that, sir.
Thank you very much. Okay, Keith.
Chairman, we're going to take just a couple more follow-ups. This one is from Zaz Hollander from the Anchorage Daily News. How many GA aircraft carry ADSB out that are now? And is this common for private pilots?
Yeah, I don't have that information. How many GA aircraft have ADSB out? I don't know. Aaron, that's really more of a question for the FAA. But Aaron, do we have any idea the number of GA aircraft. And we say GA, we know if it's going above 10,000 feet, it's got to have it, and above 18,000, it's got to have a different type of ADSB. Any thoughts?
Like you, sir, I don't have the figures in front of us. And you're exactly right. That would be a question to contact the FAA about and see what kind of acceptance they're getting in the ADSB 2020 rule that was implemented starting January 1st. Unfortunately, I don't have any of that. I couldn't even begin to, unfortunately, give you a guess on that.
Thank you very much. Wish we had the answer for you there.
Okay, we'll take one more. This is from Jill from Alaska News Source. Would you explain again how much lead time a pilot needs to take evasive action to avoid a collision?
Yeah, in the FAA's advisory circular on collision avoidance, and that advisory circular is it is AC. Well, I don't have it written down. I think it's like 42 or something, but what is that AC number? Anyway, advisory circular, pilot's role in collision avoidance. I can give you the exact name of it in the advisory circular.
Chairman Sumwalt, I have it here. It's FAA Advisory Circular 90-48D as in Delta.
Okay, good. And it is called, and I think I gave the name right. Let's see here, FAA pilot's role in collision avoidance. Is that correct? Yeah. I don't even see it. Yeah, pilot's role in collision avoidance. Yep, and be sure and get change 1. AC 90-48 Delta, change 1. Yeah, so the literature from the FAA indicates that the time that it takes a pilot to identify, visually spot something, process it in your brain. You've got your eyes that have to see it first, process it in your brain, determine that it is a collision threat, determine what evasive action is required, and then actually implement that input. Takes a minimum of about 12.5 seconds. So I think that sort of speaks for itself. It speaks to why the see and avoid system, while strictly relying on that, is not getting us where we need to be in terms of preventing mid-air collisions.
Thank you, Chairman. And this concludes today's NTSB media availability. Thank you for participating. A recording of the availability will be made available on NTSB's YouTube channel as soon as practicable. Follow-up questions should be directed to NTSB Media Relations at ntsb.gov or 202-314-6100. Thank you.
Thanks, Keith. Once we go off live, I'd like for you all to stay on the line just so we can chat amongst ourselves. But thank you all for a good press briefing. Thank you. Media availability.